Well, afternoon. Sorry I couldn't make it yesterday, but we were at Johns Hopkins, and Holly was taking tests, and they came back very good. So, despite my Irish superstition about talking about anything good, the news was good. So we're glad about that. So that's one of the things we can be happy about this Thanksgiving. And those of you who write and wish Holly well, we feel it. We feel the wellness washing over us. So thank you for that. The Jefferson report, the weather report today, is it's about 47, 48. The wind's at about 10. It's chilly, and I have a pea coat on. Now, this pea coat didn't come from Army Navy as it did when I was a student at Columbia. They were the most comfortable coats, and they didn't cost much. And right now I couldn't tell you if I remember where the Army Navy store was, but in Manhattan it can't have been that difficult to find. So what's the news today? Well, there are a couple of things. Those of you who are following the Mideast, we may have something good happening there. And I saw one report that Netanyahu said that there would be a pause for every 10 hostages that were released. And I don't know if he's every hour or whatever. These guys, you can't know what they'll do as compared to what they'll say. And the belligerency remains high. And I'm not saying I don't understand that. But it's hard to have any kind of talk about relations going forward or stopping a war or terms of peace. So I think we just have to wait and see what they actually do as opposed to what we hope they'll do. And there are people working in the shadows of this disaster to see if they can make something good out of it. Our hero Altman from Open AI, Open Artificial Intelligence, who couldn't reach an agreement on Sunday with Open AI, then said he was going to Microsoft, and he apparently had a deal there. And the employees who wanted him to come back and the board to quit, they were quite vociferous. And when the board on Sunday wouldn't apparently agree with him, they said they'd go with him to Microsoft. And now he's back at Open AI. So go figure. It'll take us days or weeks, and somebody will tell us the whole story, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting, actually. In terms of hostilities or feared hostilities, we had an incident near Niagara Falls, as I understand it, near the Rainbow Bridge, and the facts seem to be unclear. I don't know how that could be possible, but what was known and observed you would think would be known by now, but we get spoon-fed this stuff. One early report, well, let me tell you the latest report I heard, and then you can compare it to what you know by the time you hear my remarks. Two guys, I believe they were guys, in a car, drove their car into one of the checkpoints and killed themselves. Originally we thought it was a bomb, and now we're told there's not a bomb. And originally, I guess we thought these two were terrorists, and we don't know. And maybe they're just drunk, or they've seen too many action movies, or they are terrorists. So everybody's taking it very seriously, if you can judge by the grave, whispered, baritone voices that we hear. But nobody seems to know anything. And don't you always get the feeling that during this period when we don't know anything, it's because they want to manage what we do know? Anyhow, that's what's going on. There are other things happening, but today is the distant anniversary of the assassination of my president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And he was a man who, for whatever you say about him, struggled to serve America and was killed for it. Some say it was a lone gunman, and there are two best reasons for that being bullshit, is that apparently his brain was shot out toward him for the back of his head, and Oswald, who claims to be the sole shooter, was at a point at Dealey Plaza, and I've been to Dealey Plaza, and I've been to where they claim the shooting occurred, and he had to be behind Kennedy's head shooting at him. So, I don't know, he had a bullet that sucked the back of his head out. I'm sorry to talk in those terms, but maybe we should talk about these terms more to realize the brutality of killing a policy in a country supposedly run by laws by killing and assassinating our president. Now, at the time, I was in high school. I was a junior, and in my freshman year, I was at the high school, and I saw all these university students going to the gymnasium. So I elbowed my way in there, and there was a Klieg light, and I've mentioned this before, coming from the left, across this body of students, and the person to my right, all of a sudden, was this Massachusetts senator who was running for president, John Kennedy. And I'd read about him, and it was close to the election, and he challenged us to make a difference. He told us basically that government could be a great adventure to do good. And I thought, when he became president and what he started, I thought he was doing that. And it's rare that a politician actually picks up the promises from the campaign and tries to implement them. But, you know, the Irish are a stubborn lot. It was Yeats who wrote, how did he put it? It is an Irish curse to dream things the world has never seen. Now, they say it's a curse, but in my own experience, I've seen, and not just Irish, people dream things the world has never seen, but because they don't know better, they make it happen. That's what John Kennedy wanted to do. You know, when he spoke about the space program, he was speaking about to do the great things, to go to the moon, and to do, and his exact words were the other things. So, John Kennedy, he did more than muss the hairs of the establishment. He challenged our direction after the Second World War, a war in which he was considered a hero. And although as a youngster, he was kind of an unruly kid, along the way, he decided to use his gifts for good. In fact, his father told him when he was a chote that, I believe that you have a genius about you, and if you don't pay attention in your young years to the gifts you have, you won't be able to recover them when you're older. So you have to develop them now. And I think probably some of you have found that. The DNA implanted in you, some curiosity that became your devotion, is what brought you along to maybe a career, a love life, an artistic endeavor, a decision about how you could enjoy a peaceful life, any of the possibilities. And I think that happened to Jack Kennedy. And I look back on his statements and think, what better hero could you have had as a young man? I know there are those who see Ronald Reagan and say he was that person, but I can't even imagine that. He was the showboat, the show horse. JFK was the workhorse, and the glamorous one from Camelot. People who could read and think, people who cared about what was said as well as what was done, people who wanted to make a difference. That's what they killed when they killed John F. Kennedy. And the day I heard it, I was a junior in school, and they called us, all of us, to an assembly of the school in a large auditorium on the campus that was used for plays and grand announcements. And we spoke about it there. And there were some people who were crying, and there were many people who told me that they cried when they heard it. And the reason was that Kennedy somehow brought together a nation because he had a charisma, he had a charm, he had a way. He embraced leadership even as he made errors in the Bay of Pigs, which probably qualified him to do better when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And when he defied those who were telling him to do one thing to try to make peace possible. And so the debate continues. Would he have continued in Vietnam? Did he start it? Or was the killing as a basis for him resisting Vietnam? I had one opportunity to have some information about this, and I don't trust it, but I'll tell you about it. There was an FBI agent named Sheridan, and early on he became an assistant to Robert Kennedy, and he was his investigator when Robert Kennedy was investigating the mob. And both brothers at one time or other did investigate the mob. And this may have created a tension for a variety of reasons that I'll continue in a lecture I'll give someday. But for now, Walter, who headed up the Get Hoffa squad when Bobby Kennedy was Attorney General. Well, it turned out when I was on the Hill and a special counsel to the Labor Committee, Walter Sheridan was there working for Ted Kennedy, whom I knew from a 1980 presidential campaign that I worked on his. He didn't get the nomination, but he carried New York and Connecticut on one day, and I said we took credit for that. Well, Walter investigated everything, and not just Hoffa. He was encouraged to find out what happened with the assassination of John Kennedy. On a weekly basis, he would visit Hickory Hill, Bobby's house. And so one day I asked him what he could tell me. And he said, well, no one really knows. But he said it was the mob. Well, I wondered if that was true. I mean, as much as I admired and enjoyed and thought myself a friend to Walter Sheridan, I knew his loyalty ran first to Bobby and JFK and the others. And so, but he insisted, and he had a short explanation for it, and the feeling of it has a lot of that in it. But others wonder if it was a government agency, a large political figure. The lie that puts it on the table for us all to inquire is the Warren Report, which had a magic bullet in it, which could turn corners in the air to explain the direction of the bullet in such a way as to make the story the Warren Report told a single shooter. If you've ever been to Texas and to Dealey Plaza, the explanation of gunmen placed facing the car coming toward them as opposed to going away from the book depository make a lot more sense. And then the wounds that we have make sense. And things went missing immediately after the shooting, including witnesses. Well, it couldn't be found, but that's not the story people tell. So on this day involving Jack Kennedy, I think we should think about how there are forces in this country, perhaps have always been, that were prepared by force and violence to change the path of our country. And presently we have such a person. We can identify that person. We know who the person is who's endangering America and who's leading a large charge of know-nothings who agree with him and who would destroy everything in front of us and defy the law by their violence. And so on this day, if there's anything we can think of after we remember who Jack Kennedy was, with all his foibles and all his strengths and all his inspiration, helping others to aspire to greatness as well and to participate in government and make a difference, we should dedicate ourselves to stopping Trump. Because Trump comes from that force that killed JFK. Not literally, but in terms of evoking from the past what rhymes in the past with what we're suffering in the present. So I encourage all of you to spend a moment, if you're old enough to have actually experienced the image of JFK and his time walking upon the earth doing what he was and who he was, and think that this is the force that we're dealing with through different vehicles, and it's enormous force, and it's out in the open, and it may be more dangerous than the assassination that took away our friend. We hardly knew you, Johnny. So that's what I have to say in the Cathedral of Trees, and weather and commitments otherwise. I expect to be out tomorrow. Bye-bye.